30 years ago, the PlayStation 1 was born, renowned for bringing a regale of delectable RPGs hailing from Japan over to the States and far beyond. But only one has not only stood the test of time, but cemented itself as one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and one of the greatest entries within its own series, to the point that it has now become its own franchise within a franchise. From planting seeds of its existence during an E3 2015 reveal, to budding in the midst of development hell that May Square decide we should probably do all of it in-house. 2020 finally blossomed with the long-awaited release of Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS4, the first game marking the trilogy dedicated to retelling the full story of Final Fantasy VII. And now that we have fast-forwarded to January of 2024, we have now been graced with the second installment of the Final Fantasy VII's remake project, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, released on the PlayStation 5. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth continues from the end of the first game, which shows Cloud and the gang hanging in the land of Calm, the first town that you go to post leaving Midgar. From there, the gang embarks upon the timeless adventure to find Sephiroth. Using the Black Cloak soldiers as tour guides, Cloud and the gang travel to multiple towns, cities, sunny beaches, and a casino in order to stop Sephiroth's plan to destroy the world using the Black Materia. A classic case of what happens when you biologically engineer a superpowered mama's boy. In their quest to find Sephiroth, however, the planet enters emergency mode, unleashing the last bastion meant to protect the planet, aka the weapons. As the story unfolds, the more choices Team Avalanche makes that has the possibility to alter the story's intended course, the Whispers splinter into two factions, Black Cloaks abetting Sephiroth or the White Cloaks aiding and protecting the planet. Multiple parties converge at the Temple of the Ancients, where secrets unfold of a time before the current planet, and detailing just exactly what Genova is. First off, I would like to say I consider myself fairly new to the Final Fantasy VII series. I played the original after playing Remake back in 2020, so to play Rebirth to see how the rest of the Remake project aligns with the original story was something I was looking forward to do once Rebirth was announced. I gotta say, I actually like the way the story is being presented in Rebirth, even with the inclusion of split timelines, alternate timelines, bullshittery. The game uses that aspect to create a series of unreliable narrators who is telling the truth. What is the truth? Which timeline is the real timeline? The game intentionally carries this whodunit element because behind the curtains of all of this, the real emphasis in Rebirth is on Cloud's mental health and the state of his mental health as a soldier infected with the same cells as Sephiroth. This game puts a lot of focus on the impact of this Sephiroth messing with the life stream and disturbing the course of fate, and in the same manner, Cloud and the party also disturbing the course of fate. I would say around chapter 12 is when I realized that although events are being told out of place in this game, the remake project is culminating important tidbits from prequels, sequels, and spin-offs into this one extensive remake. So my prediction, honestly, after finishing Rebirth, is that nothing about the original story is necessarily changing. Rather, what is changing is the way the story is being delivered, aka Remake, Rebirth, and whatever the name of the third part is going to be, makes this project feel like it should have just been named Final Fantasy VII Director's Cut or Final Fantasy VII Raw and Uncensored. The game also hits it out of the park with recapturing its charm and emphasizing that charm now that the party size has increased from the previous game. With the inclusion of Red 13 and Yuffie, certain party members having certain dynamics with one another are more noticeable, like the ultimate ship that I have dubbed Team Friendship with Tifa, Aerith, and eventually Yuffie. There's also Barrett and Yuffie's father-bratty-daughter dynamic. There's also Red 13 demanding to be respected as a man rather than a cute pup kitty, and Kate Sith consistently making me wish someone took the batteries out of him. Side characters and minor characters are also fleshed out with personality and flair that heightens the sense of adventure and serves to show why in the face of extinction, the good, bad, beauty, and ugly of humanity is all worth preserving, and showcases what makes Final Fantasy VII such a beloved game almost 30 years ago and almost 30 years later. The gameplay for Rebirth is as diverse as the amount of mini games present in this game. The focal point of FF7 is traversing the world beyond Midgar, and in Rebirth you get to do exactly that. Taking inspirations from games like Horizon Zero Dawn and The Witcher 3, the world map is rebirthed to merge Final Fantasy VII elements with more modern game elements that complements the exploration. The more you explore the world, the more world intel you collect to take to Chatley, which nets you points and combat simulators to collect free materia. In order to collect these points, you can do activities designated with a gold icon, like deciphering shrines where the summons are rebranded as representative gods of the respective regions and have lore that ties into the area. In addition to hunting monster variants and playing tag with Moogles, you are rewarded in some capacity for these activities. Despite more modern changes, Rebirth does stay true to what defined the original's gameplay, with puzzle sections and mini-games throughout the story, as well as deep exploration as you're moving from one town to another, one city to the next. Outside of the story, our side quest is brimming with just as much characterization and just as much minigames. My favorite minigame in Rebirth, bar none, is absolutely Queen's Blood. That is a card game among card games. Yugi Moto is shook right now. But before I move on to combat, please make sure you don't screw up like I did and play most of the game in graphics mode if you are someone who would rather enjoy gameplay. I unfortunately played most of the game in graphics mode, and while beautiful, it is in 4K 30 FPS. Once I switched over to performance in the final part of the game, the combat was much smoother and more responsive, like I usually enjoy my gameplay. Now that we're on combat, the amount of features in the combat system alone in Rebirth blows Remake out of the water. The game retains previous features from Remake and expands these features even more. There's a multitude of additional materia, a few new weapons, preset party slots you can switch to while exploring, shortcuts you can bind to the face buttons depending on the type of attack, whether it's ground, air, and synergy skills. Combat also adds a perfect parry and perfect block system that knocks opponents off balance and rewards you with a short window to deal extra damage. The biggest changes are the skill tree, where you can increase your basic stats, but the main importance are synergy skills, where you can equip synergy skills that help fills the ATB meter of non-controlled party members, and synergy attacks where two members perform a dual attack that provides a combat bonus, such as prolonging stagger time, dividing the ATB gauge into 3 bars, and extending your limit gauge. All these elements combine to make each character a walking giant in their own right and capability that leaves enough room for flexibility thanks to materia. So although it might be best to consider your party members archetypes for certain boss fights, you still have more leeway to try combinations of party members. It really just comes down to preference. Looking for a tank? Of course you can use Barret as the traditional tank, but you can also substitute him out for Kate Sith, who can switch between tanking when mounting and magic damage, or what might sound shocking, Red 13, whose sentinel stance, high speed stat, and healing thanks to his vengeance mode leaves enough room for him to be played as a very aggressive tank. Now, I normally leave music out of the reviews because, I'll be frank, I'm not the most adept at music theory. I know a little bit, but not enough to give you guys a really great analysis. But I do want to make a note that the music in Rebirth is the best soundtrack of the decade. Not of the year, not within the past 5 years. It is the best soundtrack of the decade. The music is an eclectic and diverse array of genres, multiple genres, that befits the atmosphere and tone of the story, which is what I always loved about Final Fantasy in general. It keeps the climactic orchestral numbers to dungeons and key bosses while experimenting with multiple genres when interacting with the world and its inhabitants, which is why Rebirth also loves to use the themes of characters to hone in on key story details, such as when you're at the Golden Saucer, and depending on who your date at the Golden Saucer is with, you can actually hear in the background that the Golden Saucer music is remixed with that particular character's theme. Come on, you thought I wouldn't critique Final Fantasy VII Rebirth just because it's a Final Fantasy game and its fan base is borderline rabid? My reviews are like Mike Tyson. Any and everyone is susceptible to getting big. It just so happens Rebirth is on my plate, so let's get into my critique for Rebirth. First off, let's get the easy work out of the way and give a huge middle finger to this Final Fantasy VII reskin of Hope. Whoever decided on the development team that Chadley needed a bigger role in Rebirth really needs to be tied to a chair facing a cactuar. Between Infinite Wealth and Rebirth, I don't know what's going on recently with adding a shit ton of minigames into Japanese RPGs lately. Having minigames in a Japanese RPG is a union as old as the concept of marriage. That's not the problem. With Rebirth, my annoyance is more so on how, with the amount of minigames in it, many of them require a chunk of time dedicated to completing them. It's also my qualms with the side quests as well. While I understand that all of this is optional content that doesn't need to be done, that's sort of a pretty weak excuse to use when in this game a lot of good rewards are locked behind them. But my god, having minigames accompany the plotline for side content like that is such a drag. It doesn't help that the controls at times were also clunky. The world felt like so much of the cookie cutter empty world exploration that Ubisoft made popular. Initially, I enjoyed the open world and even fully completed 2 areas, but trying to do it for multiple areas where some of the traversing eventually got horrendous, like in Gongaga and Cosmo Canyon, quickly made me decide to back away from 100%ing all the regions. I'll just be content with doing some side quests here and there and leveling up. But I would say that the main issue I have that really plagues around playing Rebirth and has been a big influence on me deciding to skip out on playing the 3rd game within the trilogy is the way that this remake project is being handled. I can't help but notice that this trilogy is really asking for a big commitment to play 3 parts that are each long enough in play time that you could argue that these would be 3 separate games in and of themselves, because it's no longer a buy if 3 parts make up one defined game into a massive project that has the risk of being developed across a huge time span. A lot of shit happens within 1 year alone, let alone 5 to 10. And guess what's happening right now within gaming if you don't live under a sheltered rock? AAA companies shitting their own beds, mass firing experienced developers and closing studios, horrible mismanagement due to the rampant corporatization of gaming where profits rules over everything else. And that's not even taking into account global economic issues. This current generation of gamers just truly don't give a hot ass of a damn about console exclusivity at this point. We have been way over the console war. We don't care about the console war anymore. Put these games on multi-platforms. Let everybody enjoy gaming. Nobody wants to go out there and search for a $500 overrated box that I own, by the way. So I was duped. I was schmeckledorfed into buying this box. And it's still difficult for most people to get to the point that most people decided, well, I'm just gonna keep my PS4. I see no reason to upgrade, especially when there are barely any games on the upgraded box. But back to Rebirth, I was under the impression that this remake project was going to go a different route, and although it does approach the story different from the original, I realized around chapter 12 that if you do know the story of Final Fantasy VII, nothing major is actually going to change. The plot is essentially the same. Like, it made me realize that I kind of don't care to play the 3rd part anymore. I don't feel compelled to continue to play the remake project when the original game gave me the most satisfying experience that doesn't require me to wait over 10 years to see it fully released. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth continues the ongoing remake project that showcases why Final Fantasy VII is a beloved entry in series within the Final Fantasy series and within video gaming history. It's a series renowned for the amount of love, care, and attention put into its characters, world, and story that define how gaming can go beyond reaching a high score and reaching the hearts of gamers. However, as the remake project aims to retell a classic story within the lens of modern gaming practices, it also succumbs to the mentalities surrounding modern day gaming, from business practices to game design and general public sentiment. Regardless, Rebirth successfully carries forth the will of his predecessor to recapture the magic and charm of his world, ensuring that the 3rd and final part will do its part in expanding even further on the series' climactic end. Thanks for watching.